church, somewhat similar to our church, but maybe not too similar. In this story, there were two young men who would sit in the front pew, rather close to each other. And some suspected that sometimes they held hands. And so some of the folks asked the pastor what he was going to do about it. And the pastor says, "I don't know what to say." Well, in the same church, there is a man who will come sporadically. And he always comes extremely late, sleeps through the sermon, and leaves right after communion. People have been complaining because he smells like cigarettes and beer and sweat.
That's not good.
And they ask the pastor what he's going to do about it. And the pastor says he doesn't know what to say. And then more recently, this new woman has been coming, and she sits right up front in the middle, where everyone can see her. And during the hymns and the songs, she waves her hands in the air, back and forth, singing really loudly. And sometimes, during the sermon, she will shout out things like, "Amen! Praise Jesus!" And some of the long-term members who have been around and know how things are supposed to be done have taken the pastor aside and asked him what he's going to do about it. And the pastor says that he doesn't know what to say. And then there's this guy who's been just starting to come, and he sits usually in the back, and judging by his fingernails, one thinks that he might be a farm worker. But you can't really ask him because he doesn't speak much English. Like, he hasn't even bothered to learn. And some are suspecting that he doesn't have a green card or a visa. And they've been whispering, and they ask the pastor what he's going to do about it. And the pastor says that he doesn't know what to say. And then there's this woman. You can mark it on your calendar. She always comes the last Sunday of the month. And she brings with her a brood of children. Somewhere between 3 and 6, they keep running around so fast, you can't count them. And none of them look alike, if you know what I mean. And the way she dresses, well, let's just say we all know what color her undergarments are. And after church, her children just make a beeline for the snacks, and they gobble them up and feast like they haven't eaten in weeks. And there's not much left for everybody else. And the hospitality committee met with the pastor to ask him, what's he going to do about it? And the pastor says, he doesn't know what to say. You know, I got a question kind of like this just last week. Last Sunday afternoon. It was brought to my attention that there are some people who have been seeking sanctuary on our property for some time now. And I have to give them props because I didn't have a clue, and no one else told me that they had seen any evidence of it. But it's concerning because we're not a campground, and the neighbors aren't so sure about what's going on. And when I ask these gentlemen their story, I hear how they're trying to save up to rent a place. But even the smallest rooms in town want evidence that they have 3 times the income as the rent, and even with a couple of them together, that's just not happening. And they're on wait lists for shelters, but it looks like it'll be a couple months. And they have medical needs and expenses, and their families can't help them out in any way. And I have another neighbor who tells me they actually feel safer with these guys here, that they chase off any riffraff who would misuse the property. So when I'm asked what I'm going to do about it, frankly, I'm not so sure I know what to say. And then I hear our gospel today. And earlier in this chapter from Luke, we hear Jesus talking about the dishonest manager and how it took so much from the employees, from the workers, that they were left with nothing. And we hear warnings about loving money. And Jesus teaching how just because someone might be rich or successful, it doesn't mean that God loves them or favors them any more than anyone else, which was quite contrary to what the society and culture in Jesus' time taught and believed. And maybe not so different from what our society and culture believes. And so when Jesus tells this story, I can't help but identify a little bit with that rich man. I mean, I don't feel rich. I don't have a mansion in Beverly Hills, or a yacht in the Bay, or a private plane. I don't shop at Neiman Marcus. But I have a pillow to lay my head on. I have a roof that protected me from the rain. And I have friends and family who I know could and would take me in if need be. So maybe I am rich. And in the story that Jesus tells, this particular rich man knew Lazarus. He knew Lazarus by name. And he knew that Lazarus liked to eat his table scraps like a dog. It's not clear if this rich man had enough mercy to have a servant bring leftovers out to Lazarus, or if he just saw Lazarus rummaging through his garbage. And we don't know why Lazarus is there. Did he have some sort of connection with this rich man? Did he blame his situation on how the rich man had treated him at some point as a boss or employer? Were they distant family members? Or was it just a coincidence that it was a place where he felt safe? And we don't also have any idea why Lazarus is on the streets in the first place. Was it because of poor choices? He was never taught how to manage money? Was he there because he got mixed up with the wrong crowd? Was it a result of addictions to substances or gambling? mental health issues? Or was it a series of unfortunate events, just a string of bad luck? And we don't know why Lazarus' family didn't take him in. Were they just fed up with him too? Or were they not able to? Or maybe they weren't around anymore. And notice in this story, it doesn't really matter why Lazarus is still there. The angels still bring him up to the bosom of Abraham, no matter what the reason. But we also wonder if it mattered at all to the rich man, especially when his neighbors would point out, Lazarus is at your gate still. What are you going to do about it? And this rich man, you can bet he was thankful for that gate. He was thankful for that chasm that separated him from Lazarus. He was thankful for that distance where he was in and Lazarus was out, as he probably believed was the rightful way of things. But what he didn't realize was that this chasm that separated him from Lazarus also separated him from the bosom of Abraham. This chasm was sin that separated him from God. Even in death, he didn't get it. Because he was still thinking that Abraham should do his bidding. Even in death, this man wasn't ready to bridge that chasm or to close it or to talk to Lazarus directly. And these chasms, God didn't create them. We do. Whenever we push back and separate ourselves from another because we believe that they are different or weird or just don't have the same values or don't live by our standards of how we should live, and when we create these chasms, we're separating ourselves from God's children. And we're separating ourselves from God. In Timothy's letter today, we are reminded that loving money, loving our power, our prestige, our status, loving the idea that we might deserve more than anyone else, just deepens those chasms. In Luke's gospel today, we hear Jesus announce to us that despite what any society teaches, Jesus is always on the side of the chasm with those who are poor or suffering or struggling or told not to be true to themselves or laughed at because of who they are or oppressed or marginalized. That's where you can find Jesus. And Jesus would have us know that there is no need for chasms, ever. That instead we are called to live lives of godliness, of righteousness, of faith, of endurance, of gentleness with all, because that is how we do what that pastor I talked about earlier didn't have the courage or wisdom to say. We reach across those chasms and we shine God's light as a beacon to welcome all. We intentionally invite and include those who don't fit in anywhere else to fit in with us. We find a way to love the Lazaruses in our midst, because as we do so, we experience the bosom of Abraham. Because the good news is that God's unconditional love and amazing grace is for everyone, no matter what. There don't need to be any chasms. And that's what this pastor says. Amen.